I'm Craig Kenneth, a relationship coach and a psychotherapist. Every relationship is different and every breakup is different. Work with me and you'll get professional help on your situation. And if you're in no contact focused on personal growth, my Knowledge Workbook series and Creative Healing course can help you make changes like you've never made before. Available now at AskCraig.net. Hi there, I'm Coach Craig Kenneth.
And I'm Coach Victoria.
And in this video, we're going to be talking to you about deep trauma and abandonment wounds.
Stay with us now.
Yeah, unfortunately, the things that happen to us in our early childhood really have such a huge impact on our ability to love, to get close to other people, to trust other people, and to have healthy relationships.
Exactly. Our childhood, our upbringing, this has such a huge impact on our romantic relationships.
And this stuff isn't taught. This stuff isn't taught in schools, but man, would things be different if parents had some parental education on how to love and care for a child and be emotionally attuned to them, and how tied it's going to be to their well-being, their mental health, and then their relationships when they become adults. So I've got an email coaching with a lot going on here. And let me just get into this one. They said, "Dear Coach Craig, I'm writing to share my story in hopes that it might resonate with others or even receive your insight. When I first met my ex, there was a magnetic attraction. We both shared a rare experience. We were both adopted at the same age.
Wow.
Me into a U.S. family and him into a French family." Okay, so adoption is a major trauma. Okay, I didn't understand this years ago, but through talking to Margaret, who worked in adoption for years, she taught us a lot about adoption. And it doesn't matter what age you're adopted. It's a very painful experience because on some level, the child, the infant, the baby feels like it's their fault. They did something wrong. They're unlovable. And they really struggle to regulate their emotions because it's a major trauma. Okay?
Right. So attachment, it starts in vitro. So attachment is already happening when the baby is in the womb. So a baby being separated from their mother, even at birth, even if you've been with your adoptive family since you were born, the day you were born, that right there is a very early attachment trauma.
The baby even gets used to your voice in utero. And Margaret was very clear about this with us. So trust us. I know it sounds crazy. I know when you're not in the field of psychology, hearing that, you're like, I thought there'd be a difference if you were adopted on day one versus at your 3 or 4 years old.
Right.
Yeah, I back in the day, I used to think the same thing. But no, Margaret would really talk to us about that and how, that trauma, it doesn't matter if it happened on day one or year 1 or year 3. It's still a major, major trauma.
Right. And that's not even to mention the other cultural factors, the social factors, how a lot of adopted children tend to think about their biological parents, think about their origins, where they came from. So there's a lot of complexities that go into it. And of course, just like any other trauma, it impacts each person differently. So here they seem to have a connection. They were both adopted at the same age, which sounds like for them was something really special. There probably was something about each other that they understood that they felt like nobody else could.
Sure.
And so that kind of a bond is really, really difficult to break.
Yeah. I mean, how many people do you meet in your life that have been adopted, let alone at the same age?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on here. That created an instant bond. I admired how he had moved to a different city to pursue his dreams despite obstacles. We connected deeply and moved in together after 8 months. But Once we lived together, things began to shift. He started criticizing me, how I cleaned, how I managed my finances, and even how I relaxed after work.
Oh, that would be it for me.
He'd say I was lazy when I was simply tired. I internalized it all, thinking he cared and was trying to help. I tried to change, but over time, I started feeling like I was never enough. Now, I want to point out a major theme that you would have if you were adopted. You would feel like you were not lovable, or you might feel like you weren't enough, that your parents, your caregivers would have kept you, right? That's what a lot of people that are adopted feel like. I'm not saying that's true, but that's what it feels like for them.
It's a common experience that we hear.
Yeah. So again, so you see the correlation to maybe not feeling like she was enough for her mom or dad to keep her, to now feeling it like the same thing with her boyfriend.
And many of you who even weren't adopted might be hearing this and might be able to empathize, right? Because a lot of these kind of wounds, they run really, really deep. And so adoption is a attachment wound. There are other attachment wounds that can affect us in similar ways and can cause us to have kind of similar themes that we grew up in, messages that we grew up with.
He often withdrew emotionally when upset, which triggered my abandonment wounds. I was adopted 3 different times. Brutal. You can only imagine. Yeah. I mean, I used to work with kids in the foster care system, and I was lucky to have Margaret supervising me back then because she understood it. But it was tough, seeing these kids in a foster care. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of abuse.
The system is broken. The system is broken.
And it's not only just by these foster parents, but remember that a lot of these kids that are abused, are removed from their home, so then they act out that abuse with the other kids in the foster families. Okay? So there's a lot of different ways. You have to imagine sometimes they're sharing bedrooms, things like that.
Well, and also, I mean, I think now they're trying to do a bit better with educating foster parents, but sometimes foster parents or even adoptive parents aren't really aware of the nuances of what it's like to raise a child that's adopted, right?
Yeah.
And so they're going to expect this child to be just super grateful for them, adopting them and taking them into their home and going to act like perfect, cute children for them, right? When that's not always the reality. This, in some cases, is a child coming in with a lot of trauma, and it takes a trauma-informed approach to be able to manage some situations. And I'll say even people who are really well-trained, even therapists who adopt children themselves, struggle, right? So there needs to be more education out there in general. The system, there's a lot of complications and issues with the system. So I'm grateful that she was able to write out in this email some of her experience and also share just from that breakup perspective what it's like in addition to her adoption experience, some of her experience being adopted, going through this.
So we got some more here. Things got even more intense when his mom came to visit us. Oh boy. When there's drama, look for mama.
And already, take out the adoption, everything that's been said here has been stressful enough for any relationship. Taking out the trauma, right? Add the trauma, gosh.
I was working 7 days a week, and she and her husband stayed in our tiny 1-bedroom apartment. On her last day, she privately told me to break up with him, that he didn't love me. Are you ready for this? I didn't tell him immediately, but I did message her and then told him the next day. That same day, his mom called him a monster and said he couldn't love anyone.
Wow.
When there's drama, look for mama. I mean, that is brutal. Remember, this is an adopted mom that is calling their adopted child, adult now, a monster. Can you imagine what this woman would think about it? You think you're being adopted to a loving home? A monster who could never love anyone. Awful. But you can imagine, think about that just for a moment. How would being raised, first of all, you're adopted. Then to be adopted by somebody who would talk to you like that, how would you trust anyone? How could you be in a relationship with anybody or have something healthy with anyone?
Right. And because of just this lack of education, lack of training for foster parents, adoptive parents, a lot of times those kids who are adopted and adopted several times, those messages get deeper ingrained. It's your fault. You're not worthy of it. And this is tough because, in her case, she had mentioned that she had been adopted multiple times. We don't know if he's only been adopted once or what, but these messages can be ingrained time after time of you're not enough. It's your fault. There's something wrong with you.
And then there's all kinds of other things like growing up, you don't know who you are. It's weird to think that you could walk by your parent and not know that it's your parent. Think about that. And Margaret has told me about clients that felt like that. Like they could be walk right past their mom or their dad and not even know that it was them. And that clients have talked about how horrible that feeling is to just go. You could go into the store and walk right by your dad and not even know it or something like that. All right. He was deeply hurt by her, but he still felt she was right about me. He ended things for good in May. I moved out immediately, but I still hoped he'd realize I wasn't the villain. I had just tried my best. We went no contact for 3 months until he reached out again. Soon after, he was stabbed by his roommate in a conflict over cleaning. Ironically, the very issue he judged me for. Okay. He said he only felt safe with me and asked for help. I supported him during recovery. Wow. Then the cycle resumed. Long stretches of silence. Then reconnection. We'd reach out to each other during vulnerable moments, like when I went to another country to reconnect with my birth family, or when he took a trip to the same country. I guess he was born in the same country.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
To reconnect. Yeah. Wow, so they were both adopted from the same country.
Wow.
She didn't even mention that till now. So
levels of connection.
Same age they were adopted at from the same country. And I'm not going to say which country it is, but it's not a big country. Okay, so it's like, wow, the chances of us meeting, being adopted from the same country at the same age, pretty wild. He decided to move back to a different country permanently, saying where they were living at was never for him and that he only stayed for me. Before he left, we agreed to spend time together, but ended up being intimate. I later asked if he'd been with someone else, and he said yes. That broke me, not only emotionally, but I was concerned for my health. His reasons for ending things were that he didn't feel seen by me, that I was needy and relied on him too much, and that he didn't want to try again. I understand my mistakes. I was anxious, I missed his cues, and I clung too hard at times, but I also gave him my heart. I feel so betrayed. I keep asking myself, was any of it real? How could someone I gave so much to continue to hurt me like that and leave me feeling unseen, unworthy? Thank you for taking the time to read this. Your content has helped me stay grounded. I'm still healing, but I'm ready to fully move on now, I think. Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
What I think about is the invisible loyalties that he has here to the adoptive mom. It seemed like she noted a shift from when the mom came over and the mom got into his ear, right? And this happens in all families, adoptive or not, right? A lot of times we'll have this kind of connection that's almost enmeshed with their family, right? And so their opinions end up having high priority in our life, sometimes even over our own decisions and priorities and opinions.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to always think about what our family says about somebody or they think about somebody. And she was sabotaging this mom. Like mom was telling her to privately break up with him. And that was the same day mom called him a monster, maybe because he wasn't doing what she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my guess.
Right.
Now, I'm not quite sure when he hooked up with somebody else. He did say there were she did say there was long stretches of silence, then reconnection.
Mm-hmm. There's the 3 months of no contact.
Okay, so it must have been in that 3 months
Mm-hmm.
that he hooked up with somebody else. And, you know, you should have asked him that before you were intimate. I hate to say it, but you have to be really careful.
Mm-hmm.
When you're not talking with somebody, they could wind up being intimate with somebody else.
She might have not thought he would have done that.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, you definitely have to take your own health into your own hands. Here I could see the situation is tough because of the levels of connection with both of you having experienced some very unique and similar things.
Yeah. But, you know, at this point, it sounds like he's moving out of the country and, you know, you're beating yourself up. You feel betrayed. I get it. Was any of it real? Yes, I do think the connection was real. Mm-hmm. I think that you both have major trauma. And listen, I'm not blaming you for it. You were small when it happened to you. You were, I don't want to say victims, but in a sense victims, right? To be given up for adoption, it's a very painful thing. It's one of the most painful things somebody could go through. And many people that are adopted or given up for adoption wind up with serious mental health issues because trauma is overwhelming. Trauma is overwhelming for an adult, let alone a baby or a small child.
Right.
You know?
Right. And you can see here how this breakup is very triggering of that abandonment. Breakups in general are triggering of abandonment, but especially if you've experienced abandonment trauma in your childhood. And so here there's deep layers of connection and deep trauma. And so it's tough because she's trying to balance out, you know, was this a real relationship? Would he really just leave me over some comments that his mom said and some just like normal relationship power struggle and living together? You know, you can see here that he's jumping ship, going to a different country entirely. That's him making some of his own decisions. And it's tough. You know, we talked about adoption, trauma, identity. All of these themes are going on here. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because we try to contain it, right? When we're going through a breakup, we try to contain the chaos as much as possible. But in this situation, he's making some serious life decisions, and we have to be able to allow people to make those decisions that they see fit best, even if we know that they might be misinformed.
Yeah. And the other thing that you want to consider is that the person that you met in the beginning was not who he wound up being when you got to know him better. And this is often true of people that haven't worked through their issues. Yes, the beginning is fun and exciting and it feels amazing, but those attachment issues, those mental health issues start to come out. And we could see it because what did she say? As soon as we lived together, things began to shift. He was criticizing me, how I cleaned, how I managed my finances, and even how I relaxed after work. He said I was lazy when I was simply tired. And you want to know what I think? I think that's his mother speaking. And I'm willing to bet that is how his mom, his adopted mom, talked to him. I've been doing this long enough. I would be willing to bet because she called him a monster, right? So if she's talking like that to him, I'm willing to bet she was saying similar things here to him when he was growing up, you know?
Yeah, and this is tough. I think the undertone in some of your questions is, am I going to feel connected to this level to anybody ever again?
Good point, yep.
You know, that's something that I'm hearing here. And I can imagine more so going through this adoption, dealing with, you know, where you're originally from, identity, wanting to connect with your identity, traveling to your home country, you know, to feel that sense of belonging. This is something that is so, so, so important to you, you know, and I just want to say that it's not impingent on this one person. You know, I can see that you have been doing things throughout your life to get to the place where you are, And it probably felt so amazing to find somebody who had similar experiences that you can relate with. Finally, somebody gets me. A lot of times what happens in adoptions is siblings get separated.
Good point.
So the people who you've grown up with and have been through these experiences with, you don't even get to talk to or relate with or feel that connection with.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's been the case for her or for him, but I imagine just how powerful this relationship was. And I'm also hoping that she's able to see more of what's going on there with his family. We know every family is different and every family is unique. When you say every breakup is different.
Yeah.
Every family, has its own system, has its own dysfunctions. And so you witnessed a glimpse of that, right?
And I think there's one major thing that she's probably feeling, even if she hasn't articulated it, is, when will I be enough?
Mm-hmm.
When am I going to be lovable enough for somebody to stay? Because I think that's what a lot of adopted people would feel like. That's such a massive trauma. When am I going to be lovable enough that someone stays and doesn't abandon me again? And I understand why you would think like that, but please don't look at it like that, because it has nothing to do with how lovable you are. Unfortunately, not all of us are born into equal circumstances in our life. And sometimes we're born into situations where there are very challenging things like abuse, neglect, poverty, or given up for adoption. Sometimes even born into a war zone or things like that. So, unfortunately, you're going to have to work through this stuff, and it will be challenging, but you'll make progress. You sound like you're very smart and determined. And there's a lot going on here, right? But we covered a lot of different aspects of trauma and adoption today. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you. Of course, if you want to get our help personally, you can do that on my website, askcraig.net. I do email coaching and I do Skype. Coach Victoria is also available for Skype coaching.
I'm here whenever you'd like to chat.
But that's it for this video. I'm Coach Craig Kenneth.
I'm Coach Victoria.
And we will talk with you soon.